You know, people always tell you that when something feels off in your gut, you should listen to it. Well, I wish I had listened sooner. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 42 years old, born and raised in Portland, Oregon, and I work as a project manager for a software company that builds security systems for corporate clients. I am not the type of man who snoops, jumps to conclusions, or makes accusations without proof. I have always been steady, dependable, maybe even a little boring if you ask some people. My wife, Melissa Carter, is 38, and for almost 15 years I thought I knew her better than anyone on this planet. She used to be warm, chatty, and easy to laugh with. She had this way of turning even the dullest Sunday into something worth remembering. But that was before this spring. This year, something in her changed, and once it started, it was like watching a curtain slowly fall between us. It started small. She began keeping her phone face down on the table. At first, I thought nothing of it, but then she started taking it with her everywhere, even into the bathroom, even when she was just stepping into the kitchen for a glass of water. I work in cybersecurity, so naturally I notice patterns, and this pattern was impossible to ignore. I could hear the muffled chime of notifications at midnight and see her glance at the screen with a smile that was not for me. She started wearing perfume I had never smelled before, something sharp and expensive, and traded her old hoodies for silk blouses and pencil skirts. She told me she was going out for co-worker drinks and girls' nights with people from accounting, but I did not know a single one of their names. Not one. I asked her once casually if I could come along sometime, meet this new crowd. She froze for just a second, long enough for me to catch it, then laughed it off and said it was just silly girl stuff I would hate. The Melissa I married would have dragged me along anyway, just for the fun of it. This Melissa, she had an invisible boundary line, and I was no longer welcome on the other side. She became glued to her reflection, fixing her hair 3 times before leaving, checking her lipstick in the hall mirror. When I tried to hug her before she walked out the door, she would pat my arm like I was a neighbor she barely knew. Resentment started to bubble under the surface. Not the kind that makes you yell or throw things, but the quiet, simmering kind that waits. The kind that notices every detail and files it away for later. If you spend your career studying networks, you learn that no intrusion happens without leaving a trace. I was already starting to collect those traces in my mind. I did not know what I would do with them yet, but something told me I would need them. And if Melissa thought I was just the steady, dependable husband who would never question her, she was about to find out she had underestimated me. I have worked in cybersecurity for nearly 20 years, and that means I see the world differently than most people. Some folks check the weather before they step outside. I check my networks. I run scans on my devices the way other people check the lock on their front door. It is just second nature to me. That is why, one evening, while Melissa was in the kitchen making tea, I ran a quick check on our home Wi-Fi. It was just something I did out of habit, but this time something caught my attention. An unfamiliar device, a MacBook Pro I had never seen before, was showing up in my connected devices list. It would not have been strange if we had guests, but it only appeared when Melissa was home. The moment she left the house, it disappeared from the list like it had never been there at all. At first, I told myself it could have been a neighbor's signal bleeding over or some glitch in the system. But I knew better. Every device has a unique address, and this one kept coming back, day after day, every time Melissa was in the house. My gut told me it was not a coincidence. Still, I kept quiet. I did not want to tip my hand too early. In my world, patience is everything. You do not sound the alarm until you know exactly what you are dealing with, because once you do, the person on the other end will start covering their tracks. Then came the night that erased any hope I had that this was all harmless. Melissa told me she was going to have a quiet evening, maybe watch some Netflix and go to bed early. I had a late meeting, and ended up working in my office downstairs. Around 11, I checked our home security system from my desk. I had installed a thermal monitoring feature years ago, mostly for safety in case of intruders. It showed heat signatures in different rooms, and that night it was showing 3 in our bedroom. 3. We live alone. We do not have kids, and our cat does not weigh enough to register. I stared at that screen for a long time, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to storm upstairs and see for myself, but the calmer, colder part of me, the side that has dealt with corporate breaches and insider threats, knew better. If you walk in too soon, all you get is a scene, a lie, and a cover-up. If you wait, you get the truth, and the truth is a weapon. I decided to say nothing. Melissa came downstairs later, kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, and told me she was going to bed. I smiled, told her I would join her in a bit, and went back to my desk, but inside, I had already started preparing for what was coming. Whatever was happening under my own roof had just crossed a line, and I was not about to let it go. It took me less than an hour to dig deeper, because when you have been in cybersecurity as long as I have, you know exactly where to look. I started with a full network sweep, pulling the connection history from our router. That unfamiliar MacBook Pro had been connecting to our network for weeks, sometimes even when I was home. It was not just a neighbor accidentally piggybacking on our Wi-Fi. This was deliberate, and whoever it belonged to felt comfortable enough to log in like they owned the place. I traced its digital fingerprint, checking cached files and temporary storage, and that is when my stomach sank. I found data fragments that should never have been there, images, chat logs, and video call metadata stored locally from that device. I knew the risk of crossing into personal communications without permission, but this was my home, my network, my life. The cached files painted the kind of picture you do not want to see, but cannot unsee once it is in front of you. The messages were between Melissa and her boss, Brian Hale, a man I had met once at a company holiday party. He was 45, tall, charming, in a fake kind of way, and I remember thinking he looked like someone who had practiced his smile in the mirror. The tone of their conversation was not just friendly, it was intimate, conspiratorial. They were not only sharing jokes or compliments, they were mapping out a future together. One message from Melissa said, "I can finally breathe when I am with you. Daniel will be fine once I explain after our Vegas weekend." Another from Brian read, "After Vegas, we start fresh. No more sneaking around. Just you and me." I sat there staring at those words, each one a nail in the coffin of the life I thought we had. There were even photos. Her at a restaurant I had never been to, wearing a dress I'd never seen, leaning in close to Brian, her smile the kind she used to save for me. The strangest part was how calm I felt reading it. It was the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. In my world, when you uncover a breach, you do not panic. You document, you secure the evidence, you prepare for the counterattack. I took screenshots, backed up the data to an encrypted drive, and stored a copy off-site. If they thought their little fantasy weekend in Vegas would be the start of their life together, they were about to learn that I had other plans. I did not slam doors or make threats. I just kept reading, kept saving, and kept my voice steady when Melissa came downstairs later to ask if I wanted anything from the kitchen. I smiled and told her I was fine. But inside, I knew the clock had started ticking. It took me less than an hour to dig deeper, because once I saw that unknown MacBook Pro on our network, I knew exactly what to do. I ran a full network sweep, tracing every digital footprint it had left behind. Years of working in cybersecurity have taught me that no device ever comes and goes without leaving traces. And this one had been sloppy. It had connected multiple times over the past month, almost always during the hours Melissa was home without me. I began pulling cached files, temporary storage fragments, and bits of communication logs that the device had left behind on our router. At first, it was small things, timestamps, file names. But then it started to get personal. The first message I saw made my chest tighten. It was from Melissa, and it was not the kind of message a wife sends her boss. She wrote, "I just feel alive when I am with you. I cannot wait for Vegas." Another message from him followed, and that is when I saw the name in full. Brian Hale, 45 years old, senior director at her company. His words were even worse. He said, "After Vegas, we start the life we talked about. No more hiding. No more sneaking around." This was not playful banter. This was a plan. They were talking about tearing my life apart like it was just a line item on their weekend itinerary. The files went deeper. There were photos of the two of them in places I had never been. Melissa in dresses I had never seen, smiling in ways she had not smiled at me in a long time. There was even a screen capture from a video call, her lying on what was clearly his couch, holding a wine glass, telling him she wished she could stay there forever. My hands were steady as I saved each file, backed them up to an encrypted drive, and created a second copy stored on a cloud account she did not know existed. When you work in my field, you never keep your only copy in one place. The more I read, the quieter I became inside. I think most people expect rage or screaming when they find something like this. But for me, it was like flipping a switch into a different mode. The mode where I stop reacting and start planning. In corporate security, when you catch someone stealing from the inside, you do not rush into their office and confront them. You collect every piece of proof until there is nowhere left for them to run. That is exactly what I was doing here. She and Brian might have been daydreaming about their Vegas weekend and starting fresh, but I was already setting the stage for a different ending. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights in my office, and went upstairs to bed. When Melissa rolled over and asked why I was up so late, I simply told her I'd been working. In a way, that was the truth. I needed more than digital proof, because in my experience, people will twist what they cannot see with their own eyes. Screenshots can be called fake, messages can be denied, but a photograph of two people in the real world leaves no room for creative storytelling. That Saturday, Melissa told me she was meeting a friend for brunch. She left in a hurry, dressed in a fitted green dress I had never seen before, with her hair curled and makeup done, like it was a special occasion. I already knew where she was headed. I had traced enough of their conversations to know Brian's address in Lake Oswego. It was not far from where we lived, but far enough that she would never expect to run into someone we knew. I drove over and parked across the street from his condo complex, my car angled so I could see the front door without being obvious. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where the sound of a car door closing carries in the air. I kept the engine running and my camera ready. I did not have to wait long. Within 30 minutes, the front door opened, and there they were. Melissa stepped out first, Brian right behind her, and the way they moved together told me everything I needed to know. They were laughing, touching each other's arms, holding hands like a couple who had been doing it for years. Her head tilted toward him in a way I remembered from the early days of our marriage, when she used to look at me like that. I raised the camera and took several photos, zooming in enough to catch the expressions on their faces. This was not a work meeting or a casual hangout. They looked comfortable, like they belonged to each other. My stomach tightened, but my hands were steady. I took a few more shots as they walked toward his car, and then I let them go. Confronting them in the moment would have been satisfying for about 30 seconds, but it would have given them the chance to change their story. I wanted the kind of proof that would hold up in the only place it really mattered, the divorce court. Once they were gone, I pulled out my phone and called my friend Mark Bennett. Mark is 46 and has been a divorce attorney for over 20 years. He has seen every variation of betrayal you can imagine, and he has learned to cut straight to the point. When I told him what I had, he did not waste time with sympathy. His first words were, "Lock down your evidence before she smells a rat." He walked me through exactly what I needed to secure: financial records, messages, photos, and anything that could prove intent. That call set the tone for the rest of my plan. I was no longer just a husband trying to figure out what went wrong. I was a man building a case, one piece at a time, and I was not going to let emotion ruin the precision of what I was putting together. While gathering documents, I discovered something I had never imagined would exist in my own marriage: a hidden credit card in Melissa's maiden name. It was buried in the back of her desk drawer, tucked inside a plain white envelope like it was nothing. But the statement inside told a different story. The balance was just over $14,000, and the payments were not coming from our joint account or her personal checking. They were coming directly from Brian Hale's personal account. I sat there staring at the numbers, realizing this was not just an affair of emotion or attraction. This was financial entanglement, the kind that leaves a trail no one can talk their way out of. The transactions on that card read like a list of indulgences from someone living a secret life. There were charges at high-end restaurants I had never heard her mention, designer clothing boutiques where a single dress cost more than our monthly grocery bill, jewelry stores in downtown Portland with receipts that listed items I had never seen her wear, and then one receipt stopped me cold: a diamond bracelet purchased just 3 weeks ago with a handwritten note in the gift section that said, "For the life ahead of us." My jaw tightened as I thought about all the times she had told me we needed to cut back on spending, that she wanted to save for the future. I guess I had just been saving for theirs. But the real punch came when I found the booking confirmation for a private suite at a luxury Las Vegas resort. It was printed and folded neatly, like something she had been holding on to and looking forward to. The room had every upgrade imaginable: balcony, private bar, spa access. The check-in date was circled in red ink, and it jumped out at me immediately. It was the exact day she had told me she would be flying to Denver for a client conference. Not only was she lying about where she was going, she was lying about who was funding the trip. Brian's name was listed as the primary guest, with her name added as a secondary. I scanned every page, took photos, and uploaded them to my encrypted drive. Every piece of paper went into a separate folder that I locked in my office safe. This was no longer just betrayal. It was calculated deception, the kind that could strip me of my home, my savings, and my dignity if I let it slide. But I was not about to let it slide. In my world, every breach leaves evidence, and this was evidence that spoke louder than any argument I could have with her. She might have thought she was building a new life in secret, but all she was really doing was building my case, one careless decision at a time. In Melissa's desk drawer, I found a manila folder that stopped me in my tracks. It was not hidden deep or locked away, just sitting there as if it was nothing more than a stack of old receipts. But when I opened it, the truth inside was sharp enough to cut through whatever hope I had left for our marriage. The first thing I saw were 2 business cards from divorce attorneys in the city, each neatly clipped to a small stack of notes. She had written dates, names, and even case references on sticky notes, like she had been shopping for the best option to handle her transition. There was no hesitation in the handwriting. This was not an idea she was considering. It was a plan already in motion. Under the business cards was paperwork for a legal name change, ready to return her identity to her maiden name. It was surreal to see her handwriting on official forms, the same handwriting that used to fill birthday cards and grocery lists, now tied to a plan to erase the life we had built together. Her maiden name was scrawled across the top in bold, confident letters. That alone told me everything. She was not just preparing to leave. She was preparing to rewrite herself, as if I had never been part of her story. The final piece in the folder was the one that turned my stomach. It was a printed draft of an email titled, "To Daniel." I forced myself to read it slowly, word for word. It began with her telling me I deserved better, and that she hoped I would one day understand her decision. But buried toward the end was the part that revealed just how far she was willing to go. She wrote about needing a fresh start, and mentioned that she would be taking the funds from our joint account to build stability in her new life. It was not a request. It was a statement of intent, like she had already convinced herself it was fair. I sat there holding that email, my hands calm even as my mind raced. In my line of work, you learn that every breach starts long before it is detected. This was hers. She had been planning this escape for months, maybe longer, and I had been living beside her, blind to the details. Now the details were all I could see. Every receipt, every charge, every message I had collected fit neatly into the outline of this exit plan. I placed the folder back exactly as I had found it. She could not know I had seen it. Not yet. Every secret she kept was one more piece of leverage in my hands, and I intended to use all of it. If she thought she was going to drain our account, vanish into a new life, and leave me with nothing but a carefully worded goodbye, she was about to find out how wrong she was. When Melissa announced her business trip to Denver, I gave her the performance of my life. I smiled warmly, kissed her cheek, and told her I hoped the meetings went well. She packed her suitcase with the kind of enthusiasm most people reserve for vacations. Humming to herself as she zipped it shut, I walked her to the door, waved as she drove off, and waited until I could no longer see her car in the distance. The moment she was gone, my smile faded, and the real work began. This was the moment I had been preparing for, and there was no room for hesitation. The first thing I did was move half of our savings into an account only I could access. I had opened it a week earlier, under my name alone, knowing this day would come. The transfer went through in seconds, and with it came a wave of relief. Whatever else happened, I would not be left with nothing. I had read enough of her plans to know that money was going to be the first thing she grabbed on her way out the door. Not anymore. I was ahead of her now, and I intended to stay that way. Next, I gathered every file, every receipt, every message I had collected over the past few weeks. I copied them to an encrypted drive, then created 2 backups, one on a secure cloud server and another on a portable hard drive I stored in a locked box at my office. I knew better than to keep everything in one place. In my line of work, redundancy is not optional. If she discovered even a hint that I was on to her, she might try to erase the evidence. I was not going to give her that chance. Once the financial and digital protections were in place, I turned my attention to surveillance. I logged into our home router and wrote a small program designed to send me an instant alert the moment her phone, laptop, or any other registered device connected to the network. It was simple, clean, and undetectable. If she came back early or brought someone with her, I would know before she even set her bag down. This was my way of keeping a silent watch over my own home, while she was halfway across the country, or, more accurately, halfway to Las Vegas. By the time I was done, the house looked exactly as it had before she left. There was no sign that I had touched a thing. But underneath that calm surface, I had fortified every corner of my life. She thought she was leaving for a trip that would be the beginning of her new future. I knew it was the beginning of the end, for her plans, for her story, and for the version of me she thought would quietly accept whatever she decided to do. The stage was set, and all that was left now was to wait for the curtain to rise. 2 days later, my system pinged with the alert I had been waiting for. Melissa's phone and laptop had just connected to our home network, but she was not supposed to be back from her so-called Denver trip for another 3 days. That alone told me everything I needed to know. A quick check on the security feed confirmed it. Melissa and Brian were standing in my driveway. She was unlocking the door with her key, and he was carrying a grocery bag like they had just come home from a weekend away. My pulse did not race. My hands did not shake. This was exactly the scenario I had prepared for. I picked up my phone and called Mark Bennett. I did not need to explain the whole story. I simply said, "They are here." Mark's voice was steady as ever. "Stay inside. We are ready." Within 15 minutes, a process server pulled up to the curb. He was a tall man in a dark suit, holding 2 thick envelopes. I watched from the window as he walked up the driveway with the calm confidence of someone who has done this 100 times. Melissa opened the door, expecting me, and froze when she saw a stranger holding papers. The process server asked, "Melissa Carter?" When she nodded, he handed her the first envelope. "You have been served," he said, his tone professional but firm. Inside were divorce papers citing adultery, along with a restraining order preventing her from returning to the house without prior arrangement. She barely had time to react before he turned to Brian. "Brian Hale?" Brian shifted uncomfortably but confirmed his name. The server handed him the second envelope. "You have also been served." Brian opened his packet right there on the porch, his expression tightening as he read the letter addressed to his company's HR department. It detailed his misuse of company time and resources, along with evidence of the affair that had taken place during work hours and on company property. I had made sure the letter and supporting documentation would be in HR's inbox before the end of the day. I wanted him to know that the fallout was not going to end on my doorstep. Melissa tried to speak, her voice cracking as she asked, "Daniel, what is this?" I did not answer. I simply stood in the doorway, watching her realize that every secret she had been keeping was no longer hers to control. The process server thanked me for my time and walked back to his car. Brian looked at me like he wanted to say something, but thought better of it. I closed the door without another word. Inside, I felt no rush of victory, only a cold certainty. The trap had been set, the timing was perfect, and now the consequences were in motion. The knock they did not see coming had just rewritten both of their futures. I stood in the doorway as Melissa unfolded the papers, her hands trembling slightly. Her face went pale, the color draining out of her cheeks as she scanned the first few lines. I could see the exact moment she reached the words adultery and restraining order. Her eyes flicked up to mine, searching for some sign of hesitation, but there was none. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say a word, Brian stepped forward like he was going to explain. That is when I cut him off. "Save it for your next job, if you find one," I said, my voice steady and cold. I meant every syllable, because I already knew his career was about to unravel. Brian's company was one of the strictest in the region when it came to personal conduct, especially for executives. They had clear policies against using company resources for personal affairs, and thanks to my evidence, they now had a detailed record of exactly how he had broken those rules. His travel expenses, phone logs, and even time card entries all showed him mixing business with pleasure, and not in the kind of way the board would forgive. I had made sure HR received it all before he ever walked off my porch. The look on his face told me he understood just how much trouble he was in. Melissa's breathing had turned shallow, like she was struggling to keep herself calm. She glanced at Brian, but he avoided her eyes, already calculating the damage. I could almost hear the weight of it hitting him, the loss of his job, his reputation, the comfortable life he had built. As for Melissa, her world was about to get much smaller. Without my income, without the house, without the savings she had planned to take, she was going to have to face the reality she had been trying so hard to outrun. The next week was quiet on my end, but I kept an ear open. Word travels fast in corporate circles, and it did not take long before I heard that both Melissa and Brian had been called into separate HR meetings. Brian's ended with him being escorted out of the building. Melissa's company learned enough about the situation to terminate her as well, citing conduct unbecoming after the fallout made its way through the office. Just like that, the two people who had been planning their fresh start together were standing in the wreckage of their old lives, stripped of the very stability they thought they could build on my back. I did not celebrate. There was no fist pump or champagne. This was not about feeling triumphant. It was about balance. Actions have consequences, and I had simply made sure those consequences found their way to the right people. They had gambled on secrecy and arrogance. I had invested in patience and precision, and in the end, patience won. The divorce wrapped up in just under 60 days, faster than I ever expected. There were no drawn-out arguments, no shouting matches in court. The evidence I had collected spoke for itself, and there was nothing she or her attorney could say to twist the facts. I kept the house, the car, and most of the savings. She left with whatever she could fit into her sedan: boxes, clothes, a few personal keepsakes. Watching her pull out of the driveway for the last time, I did not feel sadness or relief. I felt clarity, the kind that comes when you finally see something for what it truly is. The weeks that followed were quiet. I focused on work, on keeping my life moving forward. I repaired the things in the house that had been neglected, took long walks in the evenings, and reconnected with friends I had not seen in years. It was strange at first, waking up to silence, but that silence began to feel like a gift. There was no tension in the air, no guarded looks over dinner, no phone face down on the table, with a secret lighting up the screen. My home felt like mine again. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting at my desk one Saturday morning when my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. The message read, "I'm sorry for everything." It took me a second to realize it was Melissa. For a moment, I considered opening it fully, reading whatever else she had to say, but I stopped myself. I had lived through every excuse, every half-truth, and every calculated omission. There was nothing she could write that would change the past or alter the way I saw her now. Without a second thought, I deleted the message. These days, I wake up without wondering whose lies I am living under. My mornings start with a strong cup of coffee and the sound of my own thoughts, not the quiet hum of suspicion. I spend my time on things that matter: projects at work, weekends in the mountains, evenings with people who value honesty. The anger that once kept me awake at night has been replaced by something far more powerful: peace. And the peace comes from knowing I handled it on my terms, without lowering myself to their level. The best part? I never had to raise my voice. I did not need a dramatic confrontation or a public scene to feel like I had won. My victory was in keeping my dignity, in protecting what was mine, and in watching the consequences of their choices unfold exactly as they deserved. In the end, the ending I wrote for myself was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of theirs in it. And that, I have learned, is the kind of ending you do not just live with, you live for.